Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Eric, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Good morning, Mary. I'm super thrilled to be here.
I'm so excited to talk with you, and I'm very interested in this new book that you have coming out, and we will be getting to that. But before we get there, I would like to hear more about you. So, can you tell us about the first job you ever had as a young person?
First job I ever had as a young person was a job that it was in a marketing research firm at a company that doesn't exist anymore. They were called Intersearch in the suburban Philadelphia area. And I was a project manager at this company. It was my first job out of college. I interned with them. And I really, really was excited to start my professional career coming out of school, just having finished my undergrad. And it was a baptism into how things are done within a modern workplace at the time. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. I've been around for a while. And what I really was completely unprepared for was, I'll call them idiosyncrasies, but maybe the better word is characteristics
Hmm.
of management and leadership. And I had stars in my eyes. I was so eager and just like predicting some of the anywhere from supportive and positive and encouraging behaviors to the volatile, political, entrenched behaviors of people that have had developed these skills and these traits over time because that was what got them to be successful. And they continued in that vein. And they didn't really care about how many bodies they left behind them. So that was my first job. I dealt with people that would just erupt in the middle of a meeting, and I write about that, in my book. I call it the raw nerve archetype. That would just try to ratchet up the ante in a meeting just to get results. I dealt with a firefighter, another archetype for my book, which is somebody that's super excited when the world is falling apart, and they come alive and they do excellent work. But when it's peacetime, they lack the strategic part of their brain that helps them prevent forest fires, if you will. So that was my first job, and I learned a lot. And it was a learning experience.
I think that's such a good point. When somebody is in school, they're in college, and they're learning how to do their trade, so to speak, right? So how do I
Mhm.
market, or how do I be an accountant, or whatever it might be? And yet, this real world piece of what is it like to work in a corporate setting, let's suppose if that's what you're going
Mhm.
into, or really what if it's blue collar, white collar, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
You're going to be working with people, and these people are not these detached theories that you're learning about. If you want this outcome, you do A, B, and C. It's so very sterile in a way because
Mhm.
it never works that way because we're dealing with people who
Right.
and the volatility of the market, all these other sorts of factors besides the detached work itself.
Right. Right.
So if you were to go and be a college professor, let's suppose,
Mhm.
and you were teaching in marketing or business or whatever it might be, what would you do, knowing what you know now, to prepare um, eager people entering in the workforce about the realities of doing what it is that they want to be doing, executing their work?
What an amazing question. So maybe I'll answer it from what I wish my professors would have taught me, and
Yes.
maybe the answer will probably be the same. Um, it it's not necessarily what you know, because what I've learned is you can be 100% right. You can have all the data backing you up. You can be on the side of logic and reason and sensibility. You can have a path forward that's so crystal clear that not just you believe it, but anybody else you ask, peers, other managers, other people in your professional sphere, they're like, yes, obviously that's the right thing to do. And yet you will attend meeting managers, peers, supervisors, and you will be shocked by how difficult it is to really kind of understand the way in which people don't appeal at all to what you're saying. Or regardless of how much truth that you believe that you are espousing, and the logical reasons associated with it, um, they're just not interested. And you are surprised, you are
Mhm.
shocked, you are frustrated. You turn inwards and you say, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just not communicating this right. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe this isn't the right thing. Maybe I don't know anything. I just really don't understand why this is happening and how this could be happening and so forth. And so I think that what I would have loved is, yes, you will be right, but unless you've gotten the person who you're trying to convince to really listen, to be in a place that they're ready to listen to new ideas,
Mm.
it'll never work. And what I learned is that being right, and I tell my teams this, being right's only 50% of the battle. The other 50% is getting that person to be ready to listen to you. Because you can start, and I used to do this. I used to sit in conference meetings and I'm like, no, 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 you're not understanding. These are the facts. I've done this before. I've actually been where you are right now, and this is how to navigate through this. And they're just not ready to listen. So then I just, by trial and error, I started adopting like, well, listen, if I was behind your desk, what I hear you saying is, if I were you, these would be my concerns. Is that correct? Before I start going in guns blazing with the right answer.
That is wonderful. I absolutely love that. And I think that you really hit on a huge problem that people have at work is we have this sense of justice, right? We have this sense of justice. We have this sense of truth about what is right. And it is so arresting and shocking when people don't see the facts the way that we see them, when
Hmm.
they don't see the world the way that we see them, especially when it's really clear and in particular when it's within our world of expertise. And we might, quote unquote, know that they're wrong. And yet, in a big sense, it doesn't matter. You could know all the secrets of the universe,
Hmm.
but and you might be right, but if you don't have other people on board, if you said if they don't have ears to listen, if they're not prepared, if you haven't built a relationship, if you haven't, instead of forcing your vision on them, understand who they are. What do they
Right.
need? And many times, as you know, it's not what we say, but how we say it. So for
Completely.
some people, the guns a-blazing approach is reassuring, like, oh, this
Hmm.
person is so, they know what they're saying and they're charismatic. And other people, like myself, that's a turnoff. Like
Right.
it feels, usually it feels like you're not re willing to engage in me and my competencies and what I see and what I know, and clearly you don't understand us.
That is
But
pretty insightful. I used to have to honestly, this is a true story. When I realized this, and I didn't realize it on my own, by the way, I had a really, really good manager who was like, "You are super smart." And when I went to work for the second company that I worked for, they hired people based on what you knew, like how much of the encyclopedia or the internet was in your brain around your job. And that was very reassuring because I could, study up and I could, wow people in the interview, and they loved it when I was guns blazing. But when I went to a decision makers meeting, one of the first managers I ever had said, "It's not what you know, it's how you say it." And I literally had to sit on my hands in these meetings to not just blurt out the answer. The perception of, you've asked a great question or you presented a good problem. Let me ponder a little bit to think about the right answer. And that was super valuable to people that were older in career because nobody wants, their problems to be routine. Nobody wants their problems to be, oh, there's an obvious answer to this and you just missed it. They want you to think about it and ponder and be like, man, let me think about that and ask follow-up questions. And that I literally had to sit on my hands for when I was early in career.
yeah, and I think, there's this beauty and zeal to youth. And the young, fresh out of education, they do know and they do see things in a particular way that are very valuable to an organization. But there is a black and white thinking when you are younger in your early 20s
Hmm.
that there's a truth to it, but it's not the whole truth. And seasoned professionals, they have gone through this route and maybe this negative thing happened, or oh, this other piece is missing that you wouldn't know unless you've done it.
Right.
Or maybe when you did it in the 80s or the 90s, there were these extraneous factors. And so this pause to, even though you're sure you're right, the pause for the optics, but the pause really to continue to be curious. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm right here, but I really can take a pause to think, okay, it's clear to me. Why is it not clear to them? Maybe I'm
Mhm.
not seeing something, which opens you up
Right.
to ask those questions and to then really engage in dialogue, right? This dialogue is what is so very important for solving problems and building relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. That the dialogue is really what they value. They don't want the answers right away. And honestly, you know what? I think I still struggle with this 25 years later. And I kind of have to edit myself and I have to pull myself back and I have to say, I know exactly what's about to happen. I've seen this episode before. Yeah, so just because you know what the answer is doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to apply to the situation.
Mm.
That you have to kind of, and there's probably there's an appropriate label of bias that I'm forgetting, but the type of bias, but whether it's recency bias or whatever it is, but you have to be mature enough to realize that even though you think you might know the answer, there are going to be little elements that are going to make this a unique situation, and you have to allow for that, discover it, and not arrive at that decision with an incumbent attitude.
Yeah. I appreciate that you said that 25 years later, you still struggle with with sitting on your hands and taking that pause. I am the same way because I'm a philosopher by trade. I deal in ideas. I'm very interested in the space. I've seen a lot as well. And yet I have to, even though when I first encounter a problem, I think, oh yeah, I know what's going on here. I know what you need to do, to sit back and say, but as you said originally, this is their problem. This is their particularity. And the particularity really matters because if I see what the solution is, it doesn't matter if they don't see it. And of course, we know a solution that we arrive at is going to be more powerful than what somebody tells us.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
so part of being a third party or a consultant or a partner with somebody, a real partner gives the other person space to discover and ask those questions and sets up scenarios to help them discover, helping them, not just boom, but helping them along, but so that they can see and internalize. And the more we internalize what the problem is and therefore the solution, the more we're probably going to act on that.
I think that that's so insightful. There are certain circumstances in which your manager or your leaders or your team will want an answer based on your expertise.
Right.
I think that those are fewer and far between than the circumstances in which you just talked about, which is you need to guide people to make them feel like they are arriving at the answer and that you are the facilitator instead of you just kind of blurting out the answer and being like, this is it. Here, let me help you get there. Those instances are more common in which you have to be like, well, what if we did this? And have you thought about this? There was a time, and storytelling is super important, but I feel like, at least when I came out of school, you're interested in the next level, you're interested in getting a promotion, you're interested in proving yourself. And you think the best way to do that is the way you've done it all through school. You get grades, you get A's, A pluses based on what you know, pass the test. And the world outside is a lot different.
Yeah, that is really true. And I think that's another thing to help students manage their expectations. Like you were graded, praised or not, based on this particular model. That goes away. There aren't typically those kinds of metrics. And if there are, they can change on a dime, right? There's a different way that you're going to now be able to chart your success and you're the one doing it now. There's not a syllabus that's given to you. There might be these external expectations, but even if they are some sort of hard number or deliverable, it's the art of coming about it and how you do it and the bridges that you build or that you burn along the way for the next is it's just very different. And I think you're right. People graduating are many times just very lost. And I'm writing a book right now about the generation gaps. And uh, I think, unfortunately, we have vilified every generation for their different sorts of failings without really understanding the context of that generation. And therefore, we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we need every generation and we don't need to vilify them. We need to come alongside and we really need to work with each other and help each other.
Definitely agree.
So, so you've gone through your first job, you had this rude awakening into to the world of work, and so tell us where you went after that.
After that, I joined Microsoft, and when I joined Microsoft, I thought what's the saying? I was a big fish in a small pond, and then I was like the smallest fish in like a big pond full of like these amazing fish, right? And so it was a scary time, but it was an exciting and exhilarating time because I was challenged in ways around what I always thought was the primary professional benefit of me, which was what I knew. And when I got there, I kind of looked around at all of these brilliant people and I said, oh no, I have a lot of work to do in order to scale to just somebody in my position. And so at that point in time, it was all about like, early in career at Microsoft, it was all about what you knew, how smart you were, how many acronyms you knew. When somebody showed up to a meeting and they were talking in acronyms, this was before we had devices were off, that we could just look something up really quickly. Like if there was an acronym you didn't know, no one would ask, what's that acronym? You would then try to like do some conversational judo where you'd be like, use the acronym in a sentence to make it seem like you knew what it was, right? So it was all about like what you knew. But then as we started, and I started out in the consulting division, it was then just being 5 minutes ahead of your client. And probably any consultant knows this trick, right? Seem knowledgeable enough to be 5 minutes ahead of what your customer is going to ask, and you're a great consultant. And that's definitely true. But what I started learning was how these managers that I had, these leaders were great in some sense. But I started noticing that some of these idiosyncratic behaviors or characteristics kind of repeated in different managers that I've had over the years. And what was interesting was, again, these leaders are fantastic human beings, but what I started to realize is that these patterns are the same. I've seen this before. Not only have I seen this before, but I know how to deal with this now because of the scars that I've gotten. But I also it helped me realize in retrospect, now looking back, that everybody is on a learning journey. Your leaders are on a learning journey to be better. Their leadership is on a learning journey. You're on your own learning journey. And so vilifying people and characterizing them by some of their worst qualities is definitely something that when you're younger, you definitely do. But once you start trying to realize that I actually not only have to deal with these individuals, but I have to make them my fans. I have to make them my amplifiers. And how do I do that? Like, and so what I started to realize, again, it probably built from my consulting experience. In my consulting experience, I was talking to CTOs, CEOs, CXOs, and developing this diplomatic like tone of voice, like how to basically, tell them that, hey, your place is a mess without saying that. Utilizing some of those skills to kind of help my managers grow, to kind of help them deal with the impacts of some of their behaviors that they might not see. One of my managers was a unbelievable champion of mine. There was just some super blind spots that he had. This was the same manager, by the way, that said, Eric, sit on your hands. It's not what you know, it's how you say it. But this manager was one of my archetypes. He was the attack sub manager. And so in the book, I write about how the attack sub manager is somebody that surfaces and then just shoots a bunch of missiles. And you're like, wait a second, what do I have to do? Wait, I need more details about that. Wait, what meeting is this? It's in 2 days. How could you tell? How could I just be hearing about this now? And then they go back under the water and they become irresponsive on any channel, text, emails, IMs, they're Slack, Teams, whatever. They're just not there. And you're left like, I only have about 30% of the information to meet this deadline like in 2 days. And so I began like noticing that throughout my career, both internally and then outside, dealing with the companies that I work for, that these patterns repeated themselves. And the more I saw some of these patterns, the more I was able to successfully deal with them and guide others in how to deal with them and grow that manager. And I think a lot of maybe early in career people don't realize that just because your manager graduated earlier than you, is a leader in an organization, is established, is older, doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have stuff to learn from you.
Mhm.
And if you do it in the right way, you can actually help grow your manager. In the book, I have several examples of how that works out.
That's brilliant. Many of the things that you said. One, I was like, where do I want to start on this? But one thing I want to talk about is what a wonderful de-escalation technique when we have a manager that is distributing, giving some kind of behavior that is making us difficult for us to work or bringing about a negative or even a toxic work environment. We can so much feel disempowered. We can so much feel it's just can be very overwhelming. But if we're able to see that this is a pattern about this particular person, then we can depersonalize it. Okay, it's not about me, it's about them. It really is about them. Any negative behavior is about the other person, and it's fueled by a variety of things. Could be organizational, could be personal. I mean, there's just a lot of things. But that's the first step. Oh, they're not just attacking me. This is about them. It's not about me. Um, and so, and then to think about also what you said, which is just so brilliant, is that so many times when we are in conflict with somebody, we just want to say they are a bad person, and they're a bad person in this way. Full stop. That's the story about them. They are a dumpster fire, right?
Okay.
And but when we see, oh, this is a blind spot this person has, I have blind spots, they have blind spots, their blind spot is really negatively impacting me, but they are a whole person. They're a person on the way. I am a person. I'm a person on the way. And this is where they are right now. And not to say that this isn't really negatively affecting me, but when we can get a handle on it, now we're in a position to help ourselves. But oh, how generous to say, I can also help this other person as well.
Right.
This was a very generous attitude.
What you made me think of is what you said earlier is the injustice of the situation usually drives our angst and our kind of negative downward spiral, which
Yeah.
is, like it's like a self-fulfilling storm or prophecy or what have you. But the fact that it's just so unjust that you're being subjected to this circumstance, these series of circumstances, this individual it can be challenging to deal with. And the number one thing I would tell early in career people is that you are going to encounter unjust situations, unfair situations. If you can just realize that that is going to be the nature, not only of this professional circumstance, this job, but just of life in general,
Mhm.
then you can actually start to kind of therapeutically kind of help yourself cope and then grow your manager and kind of make them your fan or make them your amplifier. In some instances, however, you can't, right?
Mhm.
And I think I had a manager who said, "Listen, what I understand is that people don't necessarily quit jobs; they quit managers.
Mhm.
And in some instances, you have to say, am I willing to invest this amount of time, effort, and energy into this person to grow them so that I can be better and we can be better together? Or do I look for other opportunities? My father used to say, always look for a job when you're happy with the one you have. You don't want to run out of a one burning building into another one. So those are all things that you constantly have to kind of consider.
Yeah. That is so true. And I think what is really empowering is when we de-escalate ourselves and we can right size what the problem is. Sometimes people can get so riled up that this other person is getting to come into work later than I am. And I still have to work these hours, but for some reason it's okay that they can come in an hour late and nobody says anything. And okay, let's suppose that is the case. And it is unjust. Okay, as you said, I mean, we need to get better at accepting reality as given to us. And the fact of the matter is something is unjust. Now, the question is, am I going to let that be the narrative of everything? Can I accept this, that it really is unjust? And can I let it go? What can I do about that? And so many times we make mountains out of molehills, right? So we need to really right size. Yes, this is driving me crazy, but that is a choice
Right,
because I don't have to care about this. I am choosing to care about this. Of course, that is different than, and we're not talking about illegal behavior, right?
right,
But so, and and so I really, the more I can really think about what is going on, the more I can say, as you just so well said, that is this a battle that I want to fight?
right.
And how really important is this? And can I let it go? And sometimes you can't. And so then you need to move on because you're just going to be spinning your wheels. It's going to be detrimental to you and your career. and the environment that you're in.
Absolutely. Definitely agree.
So, Eric, can you tell us about, or you already mentioned a wonderful manager, but can you tell us maybe more about this manager or somebody else who has really spoken into your life to help you to grow and develop? And what are like the specific things they have done to help you um, grow and develop?
Yeah, I think that each manager that I've had has allowed me to grow in amazing ways. And in some instances, it was dealing with some of their archetypical behavior that allowed me to grow. So they were helping me grow unintentionally. And then in most instances, there were positive arcs. It was people that recognized the talent, they recognized the ideas, they valued how I approached problems. I used to call myself like a friendly disruptor. And some managers love that, and some managers did not. And in some instances, I had to kind of tamp that down, and they were really, really constructive in the way that they told me how to say that, hey, this is not the scene where you walk in here and kick over tables and chairs and get everybody to stand on desks and think about the new way to do things. In some instances, we're not looking for disruption. We're looking for optimization or we're looking for refinement. And in actuality, I found that my passion was disruption and my passion was big ideas. And so that kind of helped me navigate opportunities for myself as an individual for my professional career. But the best managers, I think, that I've encountered are ones that amplify their employees, and they really want their team to win. They foster a culture of growth mindset. They foster a culture of not vilifying failure. They foster a culture of, yes, you have to hit these benchmarks, but I want to give you opportunities to grow and to stretch. One of the best pieces of advice I got in my career around getting to the next level or getting promoted was nobody's ever going to look over your shoulder while you're hunched over your desk coding or writing reports and say, you're doing a great job. You deserve a promotion. Maybe that happens, and maybe there are listeners that that's happened to, but I think that that's fairly rare.
Yeah.
In many instances, you have to do the job you have and hit all of the marks associated with the job you have, and then figure out what's that next level, and then how can I operate at that next level. And many organizations, mature organizations, have rubrics, they have role definitions that you can actually go on the corporate internet and look up and say, you know what, I'm actually going to try to grow myself and stretch myself so that when the promotion process happens, when people start talking about, well, who's ready for the next level, you're already operating at that level. And so your manager can be like, listen, Eric or Mary have always have they're hitting all their marks in the role, and they've done this, which are characteristics of the next level, and they are demonstrating proficiency at that next level. They are ready. So it's easy if you're already acting in the job that you want, while also doing awesome at the job you have.
Yeah.
And this set of managers really, really helped me kind of understand that. And a good manager also provides visibility
Yeah.
to you in meetings, in presentations where they are comfortable with sitting back and going like, I've asked Eric to come into this meeting and talk about the project that he did and what the results were, and I think we can all learn from this. And providing that, having managers that provide that visibility are fantastic. Some managers don't know that they need to provide that.
Hmm.
And you as a professional can ask for it to say, listen, I would love to come with you into this next meeting and talk about what our team has done. Maybe not what I've done, but what our team has done. And that allows that manager to grow with you. So those are some of the characteristics I think that really stand out from great managers and the ones as a manager myself and a leader myself that I try to kind of emulate.
I love that. And it also made me think about what we were saying earlier about people who are coming into the workforce. And many times we think the work will just show itself, right? I just do good work. I keep my head down, or I just show up. I do good work. I will be recognized. And sometimes that happens. But as it is, managers are very busy. They're doing their own thing, and we expect people to meet expectations to get their work done, right? That's the basic expectation. And so we need to promote ourselves in the right way, humbly, in the right way. No, nobody wants somebody who is bragging, but
Right.
it's not bragging or keeping your head down, right? There is a way to, what a wonderful example of asking to go to a particular meeting, asking to to do those things that are visible so that you people see you acting competently, right? You can be as competent as the day is long, but if nobody sees it or knows it, you're still doing your job, but you really are going to stay at that meet expectations. You're going to be staying at that level. And so the ability to promote yourself in the right way at the right time, in the right spirit is is very important. And the emotional maturity of a leader to not feel like they have to be the one always saying, always speaking, and always taking the credit for the
Right.
team. Um, we all see it when somebody is generous, and we all see it when we don't feel valued and seen because they are taking all the credit.
You got it exactly.
Yeah.
It's a great summary.
So, on the flip side, Eric, can you tell us about a conflict that you had with just another employee or a manager and how you dealt with it, and maybe any reflections on this side of things?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I always tell myself, I tell my kids, like try to never be surprised when it really matters. Try to anticipate. Try to figure out how you can avoid shock and horror, and just be like, I can't believe this is happening to me right now. So there, early in career, and even now as an executive, that you encounter this archetypal behavior, which I write about in the book. I call them the amnesiac. The amnesiac, as it probably is kind of self-explanatory, is a manager that is just so busy, stuffed to the gills, that in the moment, you're explaining an initiative, you're explaining a project, you're explaining reasons why you're going to recommend or actions you're going to take. And the manager is like, absolutely, that sounds, they're super supportive. They're like, that makes total sense. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Who else is on board? Did you meet with these people? And you're like, yes, yes, no, yes, but I will. And then it comes time to actually act on it, whether that acting on it is committing to it, getting budget, getting approval, going to a meeting, talking to your skip level executive about it. And while you're doing this, there's the manager shows up and your manager shows up and they're like, why are we doing this project again? Wait a second. Did we talk about, is this what's the value in this? And inadvertently, almost innocently and tragically, they start deconstructing your project, your initiative, which you did your job to get your manager on board with already. So this is an individual who maybe 24 to 48, maybe a week ago was on board with it 100%. And you feel good. I check that box. I'm ready to go talk to the CTO about this, or I'm ready to go talk to the CEO about this. And in that meeting, they show up and they're like, and they're not only deconstructing some of the things that you've said, but they become an adversary. They become like an adversarial presence in the room. And I remember thinking, like, what is happening first? This can't be true. Second is, oh, I'm going to have to deal with actually navigating how to not only convince this broad audience of my initiatives or why I think we should be doing what we're doing, but I'm going to have to do it in spite of my own manager who is actively an adversary, that is
Mhm.
deconstructing everything I'm saying despite the amazing fact that X number of hours ago, they agreed with me 100%. So getting over that shock and awe, the getting over the what are you doing right now? And getting over the confusion of, well, maybe they're being, maybe, and I'm a positive person. I thought maybe they're actually trying to root out the negatives before they actually happen because they know I can handle it. Maybe that's it. That never happened. It really was the fact that they just forgot. They are just they're I call it in the book, I call it RAM and ROM. I'm a technologist, so I think of ROM as long-term memory, RAM is short-term memory. It just fell through the RAM stack and it never was committed to ROM. They never wrote it to disk. And in that meeting, they lacked the awareness of how they sounded. And in certain circumstances, if you handle it well, the people that you're trying to convince will actually start coming down on your side, which is what ended up happening. So the number one thing I can say when that starts to happen is sublimate the shock and awe that you feel, the indignation you
Mhm.
feel, but treat them like they're an adversary. Try not to be like, hey, we talked about this because they obviously don't remember. And if you say that, hey, you knew about this, that's bad because then they will feel embarrassed. They will feel like, oh gosh, and you don't want that to happen either. So I talk about that in the book. That's one of the most challenging for me that I have experienced and still experience to this very day.
That's such a wonderful example because so many people have a problem with trust in work environments for reasons like that. The vast majority of people show up, want to do good work, right? Want to live in peace with their colleague and their neighbor and want to just do their work and they want to do good work. And so it's a kind of betrayal. It's how can I trust you? We had this conversation and here you are hanging me out to dry, like all that stuff that's going on. And then there's the blowback of the aftermath. So how did you lose trust with this manager? How did you deal with that?
Yes. So I don't think that I lost trust with the manager. When I first encountered this, it was more like, so what was the strategy there?
Mm.
And they were basically like, well, what are you talking about? So I don't think that I was going to get a good response out of why they did it. I began after I encountered this a few times in my career. I'm like, in this instance, they just have too much to do. And they are very much in the moment, and they don't have the ability to write things to ROM, to commit them to permanent memory. Now, the question becomes, well, is this how it's just going to be? Am I just going to show up to meetings and expect my manager to never be on my side? And I'm going to have to, there'll be my biggest detractor. And I'm going to have to fight them. And fight is,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to deal with them diplomatically and also achieve my desired result. Or are there things that I can do to help them write it to permanent memory? And in the book, I talk a little bit about what are the things that are in your power to do to help your amnesiac manager commit these things that they agree on in the moment to long-term memory. So they involve like, mnemonic devices, presenting the same slide over and over and over and over again, making sure that before the meeting, you kind of prep them so that when they show up, they're like, you can kind of deal with all that deconstruction prior to the actual session. So it's all about becoming super prepared and super aligned. And listen, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you can actually, the day before the big meeting, you can actually draw out all of their, why are we doing this again? Who approved this? Do we have budget? Did you check with these people? I don't think this is going to work. You can deal with all that before and then kind of build them back up. And they still show up in the meeting and do that. And so, there is no perfect answer, but what's in your power to do is to try to preempt that as much as possible. Mnemonic devices, repeating slides, never accusing them of forgetting, never being like, we already talked about this. How can you not remember this? And again, it's that injustice. How can you be in this position of leadership and not know when your team is telling you something that you have to amplify, not oppose? And those are the techniques that I still use to this day to try to manage that as best as possible.
Hmm. I love that. I mean, that's just a wonderful description of emotional intelligence. When we talk about hard skills and soft skills, or so-called soft skills at work, how very important it is to be self-possessed, with no matter what is about to come your way. And that takes work for most of us. How do I develop that emotional storehouse so that when I am caught unaware, I don't make it worse? I
Okay.
mean, because when we are caught with, what are you talking about? We just had a conversation yesterday about this. This is what most of us would want to say. But
Right.
when we don't say that, when we take the high road, when we are professional, like what does it mean to be professional at work? This person is not your friend or your neighbor. They are your boss or
Right.
even another colleague. You don't throw somebody under the bus for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
Because insofar as we can, we want to protect our neighbor, our colleague from looking bad.
Mhm.
Every once in a while, somebody has done something really terrible and, it needs to be outed or whatever. But,
Mhm.
we want to build bridges. We would want somebody else to have our back because we have lapses in memory and we make mistakes. And so the generosity that we share towards others, whether or not it comes back to us, we're always making who we are. Right. And so what kind of professional am I going to be in this situation with this boss? What I love about your book, I mean, haven't read it, it hasn't come out yet, but the title is Have You Ever Had a Boss That? And then the rest of it is Succeeding in a Dysfunctional Workplace. I love that because it's sometimes I come across books that are just talk about the negative people that we find in environments. But the fact of the matter is, not everybody can just leave. They can't just leave maybe ever because of a variety of circumstances or at that time. So what do we do with these people who are at the moment stuck in this circumstance and they really feel stuck and the pain that people experience at work is devastating. I mean, there are health consequences, psychological consequences that spills out into their families and into their communities. And I mean, the pain is can be so severe. So how, but the fact of the matter, some people feel like they can't leave. Whether or not it's true, they feel like they cannot leave. And so what do we do then? And everything that you've said so far is about personal empowerment. Okay, you're doing that, but what am I going to do? So tell us more about the book, about why you wrote it, and what can we can expect to see when we read it.
Yeah, I love what you said. It's all about like not trying to vilify the person. In fact, in the book, I talk about for each one of these archetypes, if they're asked and they were completely aware of how some of the unintended behaviors that they're displaying, whether or not they would want to behave that way, the answer would be no. Like, no, I don't want to forget. Or no, I don't want to oppose you in the meeting. Or, absolutely, I want to be more strategic than tactical. Or, I certainly want to give you all the information you need to be successful in doing an assignment. But these are people that are also, again, like I said earlier, on their learning journey. So one of the things I wrote this book for was primarily just to reflect on some of these recurring behaviors and to provide benefit for people that are maybe earlier in career or even, the current stage in career that I am, with some of the learnings that I had. And largely, I wrote it from a place of things I wished I knew earlier. But what's most interesting is I feel is that as I was writing it, I said this is largely I was envisioning a person, blue collar, white collar, whatever the industry might be, that is dealing with this type of behavior. But I also started to think about it as from a leader myself. Like if I'm a leader and I'm reading this book, am I going to be able to ask myself, well, do I do that? Do I forget things? And because I know I forget things. And my team is like, yes, we already talked about this. I'm like, oh gosh, you're right. You're right. Apologies. Thank you for reminding me. And I make myself have an attempt before any meeting that my team is going to present that, give me the rundown. And so I have these compensating behaviors that I have developed. And as I was writing it, I said, any leader can read this book and then realize that maybe see themselves in the archetype and say, oh, well, then these are the things that I want to change about myself. These are the things I should do. One of the other reasons I wrote the book was you can easily go down a much darker path once you're subjected to a lot of these behaviors.
Yeah.
You can say, I'm going to become an extremely political animal. Everybody else is political around me. Everybody else is firing arrows into my back. If I don't fire back and I don't actually descend into the same level of evil that they are, then I'm not going to survive here.
Right.
And there's a certain Machiavellian truth to that, I would imagine. But I have chosen the path of emotional intelligence to grow with, to manage upwards without becoming that brand of political evil, without becoming that political animal. Listen, there's going to be 3D chess in every organization in which you're like, the tone of what they said didn't jive with the words that came out of their mouth. Let me see if I mean, that mental 3D chess that you have to play is always going to be there.
Mhm.
But my hope is through this book, people, regardless whether you're early in career or you're a late stage executive, you can actually gain benefit from asking yourself, do I do these things? And maybe I shouldn't, and how they're impacting my team versus, hey, I'm a chief executive and I actually have to report into a board or I have to report into a chief executive officer. They exhibit some of these behaviors, and maybe now I have some coping skills that I can use that maybe I haven't thought about before in my career to deal with some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, we make these choices. And one thing that you said is that, a leader has a particular behavior and let's say it is destructive towards their team. They developed that behavior because it worked for them at a particular time.
Yes.
And so they're still executing it. And of course, largely it's they're unaware, and they certainly I have worked for leaders that are oblivious as to how their behavior is negatively impacting their team. everyone behind the scenes sort of scurrying around and talking about this bad behavior. And it's so unfortunate. I mean, what a waste of time. I mean, so much time is wasted, so many opportunities, so many good people leave, and the people we that should leave stay. The cost to not continually working on who we are as we show up, wherever we are in our career, is detrimental, right? And so, if somebody can make the choice to be Machiavellian, to devolve, but when we think about influence and power, that could be a certain influence and power, but it's still the question at the end of the day, who do I want to be? Do I
Mhm.
want to be a person of light? Do I want to uplift? Or do I want to be the backstabber who gets the promotion, but I'm the backstabber? Is it every man for himself, or is it I don't want to pee in my own pool? I want to be in a community. I want to have a healthy work environment. I want to um, be excited about what I'm doing and who I am in the world. And most of us want to make some sort of positive change. And so even in a dysfunctional environment, instead of going into those factions and then talking trash about each other and acting like the schoolyard or whatever it might be, that is a choice. And I love this thinking about, okay, this is the dysfunction in which I'm in, but that doesn't necessitate how I'm going to behave. So I can make the choice to act uncivilly or unprofessionally, or I can do something else. And I think the wonderful thing, especially when we tell ourselves that we're stuck in a dysfunctional environment, then we don't do those sorts of behaviors that will get us unstuck. We
Right.
don't look outside. Okay, well, how can I grow? How can I maybe move from this team to another team? How can I? Because we're so stuck in the cycle of why is this happening? This is the way it's always going to be. And any sort of tip to think, I can do something different. I just because you're behaving this way, if it's your manager, someone you manage, or a colleague, that's them. Who am I?
You're so right. I was actually going to raise that point that you just made, which is know your worth.
Hmm.
And again, quit. It's fully within your right to quit a bad manager, to quit a situation that you just either don't have the skill or will to try to improve. I certainly want to impart skills and coping mechanisms, and that's what I call them, which are I call them in the book coping mechanisms, because these are not surefire. If you do this and you do the Jedi mind trick with your manager, things will be fine. That is my hope is that these coping skills will help you thrive, but in certain circumstances, there you might not be willing or able to put in the energy to deal with a manager that just is doubling down on some of these archetypical behaviors. And so you absolutely have to know your worth before you become jaded, before you become hopeless, before you become in that downward spiral. Look around because you don't want to run from something, you want to run to something. So absolutely, the leaving might be one of the options that while you're leveraging these coping mechanisms that you might actually need to entertain or want to entertain.
And absolutely. And when we leave one job, especially if we're leaving under these sorts of circumstances because it was toxic to us, it's not like we leave and we're like, oh, we're done with that. When we have been treated in this way that is unjust, when we have been harmed, we have to recover. And so why not start that process while you're still there, right? And
Exactly
this,
right.
the ability to stand up for yourself, whether or not that's verbalized and anybody else sees it, it's all the mindset, right? It's how am I going to decide to process this? And while I'm still there, what can I do? And another thing that, of course, we can do is when we start to take a step back is, well, this manager might have a manager who is doing something to them.
Hmm.
And they are in this organizational structure that is just not for the environment of 2025. It is stuck in the
Right.
past, and we all had to return to work, and there's not enough desks, and there's not enough chairs for all these people, and whatever it might be. And so they are within a structure as well. And so there's another way not to vilify the person, because once we vilify the person, we are the victim. And in this sort of context, that only it does not serve to benefit us. It just serves to keep us down.
Totally agree. Absolutely.
So, Eric, as you look into the future, and this is the question I'd like to end on, and you think about your kids out in the workplace, what do you think needs to happen so that not only is everyone treated with dignity and respect at work, but they are encouraged to thrive and flourish?
That's a great question. I mean, even during our conversation, I was thinking about how much the workplace has changed in my lifetime. So some of these more aggressive, shoutings and, just slamming your fist on desks is how the world was when I started in my career. Like those really alpha male, kind of male dominated, aggressive types of behaviors. Like, you're going to have to work nights and weekends to get this done. Don't get me wrong, some of that stuff still exists. I would say that based on my expertise and my experience, some of those people have learned to turn the volume down on those behaviors because they don't do well within the current environment. But I would say that ultimately, fleeing one role and hoping that it's going to be better in another one, those are kind of, again, it might feel like the right thing to do. And I know I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth when I'm saying that, hey, stay and cope. No, know your worth and leave. But I think it's always important to when you're in an interview process, what I would tell my kids is interview your manager. Say, listen, I know that you probably as a manager have a lot of things to do. How do you deal with prioritizing? How do you deal with making sure that you remember? Would you say that you're an amplifier? How do you amplify employees? Or so these are some of the great questions that you can begin to ask when you're interviewing. And sometimes they might give you signals to say, listen, we don't do amplification here. You work hard, put your head down and, and hit your numbers. That gives you a good understanding of the type of workplace that might be, and you might not want to be in that type of workplace. So I would say, I think about my kids in the workplace or young and upcoming folks that are interested in, starting their careers and achieving success. I would say that you're always going to have a foundation of coping skills. You're always going to have to know what your worth is. You never know when a reorganization is going to happen. You might love the company that you're with. You might have an awesome manager who amplifies, who gives you space to grow, who stretches you. And then in one reorganization or one acquisition, that entire reporting structure changes. And you're like, oh my goodness, all of my career credit, which is like intangible tissue that I had with this awesome manager, I now have to start from scratch with this new manager. I have to learn them and I have to, oh, I've seen these idiosyncratic behaviors before. I've seen these archetypical behaviors before. I know how to cope with them. How long do I want to cope with them? Am I making positive progress? Am I making this manager an amplifier for me and an ally? Or is it time to look elsewhere? Like those are all the things. It's a balance and it's a spectrum and it's complex and
Mhm.
it can be like 3D chess. But ultimately, I think that the resisting the urge to kind of just enter in that downward spiral is your strongest defense against just hating what you do. And we've all had those positions where you wake up right before your alarm goes off, and you're like, oh, it's Tuesday, right? So
Yeah.
ultimately, for me, that's what I really wanted to avoid.
I love that because, it's everything that you said just really sounds like personal responsibility, right? This is my life, this is my career. And so a lot of times we think about an old school way of thinking about authority structures, they're the authority and I'm under them. But no, we're all professionals here. You happen to have graduated earlier and you are in this position, they're in this role, and I may be in that role at some point. So you're an adult and I'm an adult. What are you offering? This is what I'm offering. Are we going to be able to work together? And really understanding, you get these power structures because it has to do with paying our mortgage and this, that, and the other. Very important. But the more we can see that is this is temporary. You are my boss at this moment. And who am I? And the mobility of the workforce these days is really, if we think of ourselves as individual contributors, and here I am at this moment, how can I really add value? But this job could be downsized. In 5 minutes, I could get a call from HR, and it could have absolutely nothing to do with my work.
Right.
Or I could have a toxic boss who is out for me. What am I going to do with the uncertainty? How can I prepare now for the uncertain world? Because the fact of the matter is, it is uncertain. We
Mhm.
can't control the future, but what we can always do is control who we are right now how we're building ourselves right now. And that's how you prepare yourself for the future. I always tell my clients the best time to develop conflict competency skills and to develop structures with an organization is when things are going well.
Yes.
When you like your colleagues,
Right.
when you can talk to them. But unfortunately, of course, I get called in when things have fallen apart
Yep.
because they're like,
Yep.
"Oh, we can't sustain this. This is unsustainable." And it takes years. It takes years to rebuild. So it's always better to get ahead of it.
Absolutely.
Eric, thank you so much for writing this book. I'm really looking forward to reading it, and it's coming out in February. I think February 12th is when it's coming out. So,
That's right.
yeah, just around the corner.
Mary, this has been an awesome conversation. And thank you so much. Your questions were so insightful, and you've given me a lot of inspiration. I am actually working on a second book. You actually brought up a topic, which is how bad employees stay in good jobs, which again yields to that sense of injustice.
Mhm.
How is this possible? But this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
I've loved it too. Well, take care, Eric.
Take care.
Thank you, Eric, for being on Conflict Managed. What a fun conversation, and we covered quite a lot of ground. Conflict Managed is produced by third-party workplace conflict restoration services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you'd like to see this conversation with Eric and I, you can come over to YouTube and you can view it at 3P Conflict Restoration. If you haven't had a chance to check out my new book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do and considers what we ought to do instead to have a healthy work environment. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.